Oh, so this research here is essentially looking at how Photovoice can be adapted to be run at different sites, 3 different countries in this case, to engage with youth around environmental behavior change engagement there. So why would we want to use Photovoice in with environmental engagement behavior change? Well, currently the types of images we get around promoting environmental engagement tend to be very technological based, individualistic, they're Western, these are the kind of ones. So really by using Photovoice, we want to get that grassroots bottom-up approaches of the real stories and the real actions that's going on. So this research took 3 different orientations: adapt, visualize, and influence. So effectively, the adapt strand, the adapt strand is really looking at how the photo voice methods themselves can be adapted to across multiple sites. The visualize strand is looking at analyzing the results of that photo voice, analyzing the photo stories. And the influence strand is really looking at how those photo stories themselves can influence engagements through exhibitions and through participant engagement, and so forth. So where was this done? This was done in 3 countries, Australia, Bangladesh, and China, that were chosen because there's a range from the so-called least developed Bangladesh to the so-called most economically developed Australia, and of course, China in transition. And they represent a range of different consumption level, basically ecological impacts, as well as population and that kind of diversity. It was participatory action research. So this went over 4 years, over a range of whole different action learning cycles and so forth. So there's many different parts of this project, but I'll just drill down into a few of them here. There. So with the first strand, that was really methodological experiments with Photovoice. So adapted Photovoice to be run across in a breadth level. So distilling it down to really basically 3 workshops to run there. So what were these? First stage was around ideation. So that'd be around looking at what kind of environmental behaviors the participants would be interested in, how they saw the environment, that kind of thing. You had the typical environmental and photographic techniques and that kind of thing. Then there was the photography themselves. Sometimes that was with the students themselves, if they were primary age, or the older students could shoot by themselves. And that was very much led by the participants there. And then the images were collected, the files were collected because all digital cameras and camera phones. We got them donated, some of them around as well. That was printed off, and then there was a process around getting the participants to select their favorite photographs from the myriad that were taken. And then there was another process around producing the writing, so to write the photograph and the text, as you can see here. And there's some of the participants here. So it tried to adapt that in many different forms. So some of the discussion was in the workshops, others were online in Facebook and WeChat. We had excursion workshops. We'd take participants to particular areas, or live broadcast workshops where we'd broadcast and people would send in the photographs. We'd look at environmental action, selfies themselves. So a whole different range of sort of adapting the approaches across those countries. There's about 80 different workshops. So the second strand was really analyzing. So out of the 500 or so participants, there was about over 800, I think, different photo stories produced. So there's 2 different ways analyze them. One was through a content analysis approach, which was looking at the breadth of the photo story, so counting the types of objects in the images and counting the text, the frequency there. So that gave an overview of the kind of themes that were in the photographs and that. And so some examples here. This is around some of the transport was a particular theme that came up here. So this is one is looking at Australia, and the story here is around person selling the car to get a bike to be more environmentally friendly, and that contrasts with Bangladesh, where people don't necessarily have that option around changing that particular form of transportation. So again, looking at how a theme can work across those different sites there. So there's many examples of that, but I'll just move on to the second technique, which was relational materials analysis, which was a more of a depth approach, which is really drilling down into, in this form, the human nature connection, and looking at approaches like actor network theory or relational materialism to drill out down into themes. So looking at, say, for example, more than human perspectives. This is a photograph from China. There's sort of toilet rolls and straws, and the idea of looking like through the eyes of a butterfly, so non-anthropocentric gaze here. So interesting forms of looking at agency and those kind of things. So with the third strand, that was looking at influence. So this was around getting those photo stories, putting them out there, and how that could actually inspire environmental engagement themselves. So one part was looking at exhibitions. Here in Australia, the ones I organised in Australia, but Bangladesh and China were community-led and organised there. And then there was interviews. That was sort of drilling down a dialogical approach where we get other participants, or sort of audience members in a sense, to pick out photographs that were created by participants from other sites, from other countries, and then they'd go through a conversation to identify a particular environment action they like to take, and then they'd take a selfie of it here and a message back to the photographer there. So that was an interview technique. And then there was cross-site dialogue. So that was some schools in Melbourne here doing a form of a photo pen pal exchange with some schools in Bangladesh, exchanging their photographs and their stories and their senses of identities and communities and what they saw as possible to make environmental change. The last part was looking at action projects. So that was, again, taking from the individual photo stories themselves, taking from the process, community mapping and so forth, co-design. So then they would go to collective and seed collective projects. So someone like cleaning up their local communities or tree planting and so forth like that. So that was the last part of it. So in wrapping it up, the key learnings with the adapt the Photovoice method themselves is really looking at how the relationships with those 19 different partner organizations over multiple years was essential to the effectiveness of adapting those processes, but also the materiality, the embodied nature of people walking around in their neighborhoods, of pouring the photographs through their hands and so forth. And that facilitation being physical was a really crucial part of our participation. The visualizing part, again, it was looking at that breadth approach, the content analysis approach, providing the overview, and the relational materials approach of really drilling down and looking at the relational aspects and agency more than human in the individual photographs. So having a double approach there. And the influence side, really, again, looking at the breadth and depth exhibitions, providing that mass breadth, engagement effect there. And the interviews, the sort of more one-on-one dialogical depth around cultivating environmental behavior and action. And those action projects, really a fascinating link between the individual stories and scaffolding them to create collective action there. So thank you very much for your time.